Welcome back to the War Room, my beautiful people. I am your host, Chris Baldwin, and I am here today with my two co-hosts, Eddie Goldman from No Holds Barred News and author and historian, boxing historian, Malissa Smith. But before we get started today, you guys know I need you to hit that like button, smash it, and then follow us, subscribe to us, okay, on this YouTube channel. Now, I want to welcome back to the show, Malissa and Eddie. How you guys doing today? What's cracking?
Hanging in.
That's what I like to hear. Everybody's doing good. We've had a very interesting week in boxing. There's been we've had a major death. We've had a PED announcement, and the fight is still going to go on. So we're going to talk about that first. Eddie, you want to give us a breakdown on what happened on this? The WBC has allowed a championship fight to go on despite the champion popping positive for a PED. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, because this situation happened with the fight coming up next week with Oscar Valdez. And this fight had the drug testing done by VADA, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, because I don't think that the local commission, the Pasca Yaqui tribe, I think it's called, in Arizona, does any drug testing. A lot of these small commissions, even larger ones, do no drug testing or cursory drug testing. So they signed the contract with Valdez and his opponent to have VADA do the drug testing for this fight. The situation is that VADA has a much more comprehensive list of banned substances than WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association, or agency rather. And there's this one stimulant that's on among many that are on VADA's list that are not on the WADA list, phentermine. And in addition, VADA makes no distinction between what is called out of competition and in competition testing. This is a distinction that WADA makes, because something like this stimulant and others can be used for weight loss. It could be used for various other reasons that are off-brand. This is a prescription drug. And if you really need to take it, if a doctor prescribes it to you, you can apply for a therapeutic use exemption. And if there's a legitimate reason for it, that was not done in this case. And what happened was one of the tests that was done for Valdez showed that he was positive for it. And then all the excuses came. His lawyer said he got it from herbal tea, which is an absurdity because, of course, nobody presented any evidence of it. Valdez himself said he didn't know where he got it from. So the question is, why wasn't this fight canceled? Well, VADA does not adjudicate these situations. They do the testing, they report the results, and that's it. And in terms of what happens next, if somebody tests positive, that's up to the governing body, the local commission. So when something similar happened with Billy Joe Saunders in Massachusetts, I believe it was, that fight was canceled. In this situation, this is a fight on ESPN Plus. It involves Top Rank. There's a lot of money involved. They sold tickets for this fight. And so and of course the WBC gets a sanctioning fee. If you cancel the fight, no sanctioning fee for them. So they all got together and they said, well, yeah, it's on the prohibited list, but it's not on the WADA prohibited list. Plus it was only a small amount and blah, 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 one excuse after another that is allowing Oscar Valdez to fight after he tested positive for this banned substance. And they're using legalistic arguments because it's not on the WADA list, which a lot of people like Victor Conti have pointed out for a long time is a big problem with the WADA list. By the way, they're busting people on WADA still for cannabis, as we saw with
Mhm.
Jacare Richardson in the Olympics, but not for these stimulants, which are prescription drugs. So this is a situation. They all got together, they came up with excuses, and they said Valdez still will be able to fight next week on September the 10th. And it just made a complete mockery of this testing. Why have the testing by VADA if you found positive for a banned substance and the fight is still allowed to go on? This, to me, this shows a larger issue with governance in boxing that the promoters and networks do not want addressed, precisely so they could push forward situations exactly like this, where a fighter who used this, whether he knew it or not, is irrelevant. If it's in the fighter's body and the fighter got the advantages from that, that's the thing that's important. And his opponent in this fight, a Brazilian fighter, Robson Conceicao, is a lesser known fighter. He's 32 years old, 16-0, but he hasn't really fought top level competition before. So it's really expected that this is going to be a showcase fight for Valdez, who's coming off a really exciting fight where he knocked out Miguel Berchelt back in February in the 10th round. He was unexpectedly dominating that fight. He just beat up Berchelt. I actually thought ahead of time Valdez was going to win that fight, but most people didn't. But in any case, he built up a name for himself and a lot of anticipation. Wow, he took down Berchelt. What's he going to, he gets this belt. What's he going to do next? We really want to see this guy fight. He's an exciting fighter. So they didn't want to cancel the fight. And it's utterly absurd. This is why these promoters and networks are deathly opposed to having some kind of national commission for boxing and uniform regulations, so that not only, say, in the larger states can have some semblance of drug testing, such as Nevada or California or New York, or at least some of them will recognize VADA drug testing. There's nothing uniform that's done. And this is why they can forum shop and they could put a fight like this in a place where there's very, very weak, a very, very weak and compliant commission that really is happy to get a big fight like this, to get the money coming in, to get the fans coming in, whatever site fee, whatever else they've got for this. It's utterly absurd. And the issue of governance as such is rarely discussed in boxing. A lot of people are complaining about this if you look online. But how many people have raised the overall issue of governance? I know VADA has, in terms of what they said about the need for national regulation on their tweets. And Dr. Mark Goodman has been an advocate of that for a long time. But we don't have any real movement to that. So just another absurd situation, along with a number of other tragic ones we're going to discuss on this show, that show that there needs to be an overhaul, complete overhaul in the governance of professional boxing and really in sports in general. But I think we'll get to that.
And yes, exactly, especially when it comes to PEDs. I mean, this young lady who passed away, Jessica Zacarias, I believe, right, she should not have been fighting, first of all, because I saw that she was knocked out, 2 months or 3 months in the fight prior to that. So she should have had probably like a 6-month layoff. And she's young too. She's only 18. So I think her brain development, your skull development's not completed. Your bones are still, your skull's still like coming together. So fusing together. So I just think, yeah, it's a very sad situation. Very sad. But Melissa, let's talk about that. Hold on, Eddie. Melissa, let's talk. Oh, go ahead, Eddie.
I just wanted to add one thing about this, that some of the promoters had used USADA, the U.S. anti-doping agency, which is the official affiliate of WADA, to do drug tests. And they had done over several years, about 8 years, 1,501 drug tests. And they found only one adverse finding, one positive test, which is absurd. So they were dumped. So you can't even rely on USADA, which looks very compromised at best. And that's another reason that VADA has come in. So we're dealing with a lot of, a lot of shady stuff that's going on.
Right. Melissa, let's hear your take on the whole PED situation and this instance where the young lady passed away.
I guess, I mean, I'll go to the fact that the sanctioning body, in this case, WBC, is allowing the fight to go forward, which I find really shocking because they have been quite outspoken in their support for VADA testing. And in particular on the women's side, which is very late to the party to start to bring VADA testing onto fights. And they have been a particularly active proponent of this, as well as things like, boxing safety for women. And in their case, WBC in particular has stated they will never support 3-minute rounds, in part because they believe in their science, which is subject to a lot of question and review, seems to claim that women have a higher opportunity to have impacts from being punched in the head and getting concussions. Now, as I said, that's a whole other scientific discussion that has come under a lot of criticism in terms of how that science was derived at and whether there have really been peer studies. So that's a whole longer term discussion. But in terms of the issue of governance that Eddie raised, I mean, in this particular situation, there was an 18-year-old fighter named Jeanette Zacarias Zapata. She was from Mexico. She is a pro fighter. She had a 2-4 record, so she had a lot of losses at the age of 18, including a very serious knockdown in May, which caused her to lose the fight. She apparently lost consciousness in the ring, but came out okay. Certainly, if that fight's in the US, a boxer is not supposed to fight for 6 months after that kind of a knockdown, and has to have neurological tests, and including brain scans. Now, she was brought to, this fight actually occurred in Canada, in Montreal. So it did not occur in the United States. And a group of fighters from Mexico were brought up to Montreal to fight on the card. This particular card had a headline of Kim Clavel, who's a French female professional fighter, very well thought of, and another fighter named Marie-Pier Houle, who was also on the card, had Jeanette Zacarias Zapata as her opponent. Now, folks this particular card was actually a pay-per-view card and one of the small little sort of internet fight organizations. It was about $39.95, I think, for the fight. So I didn't happen to watch it. And I will also add parenthetically, you can't find it now because I've been looking all over the place for it. But as part of that card, though folks who did see it, anecdotally had said that the card was a complete mismatch except for the main event, which had a real fight. Certainly, Zacarias Zapata was outgunned the entire fight. And in the last round, she was knocked unconscious, repeatedly hit in the head with no intervention either by her corner or the ref till the fight was over. At that point, she literally collapsed. She was being held up in the corner and then collapsed, started to seizure, and was brought to the hospital. She never regained consciousness and expired from her injuries on Thursday. Now, her husband was also on the fight card and lost, I will add. He was one of those fighters who was allegedly, has been said to have been in a pretty bad mismatch. And since then, the promoter of the fight, it was promoted by the GYM group up in Montreal. The promoter is Yvon Michel. He had a lot of, statements saying, they supported the family and this was a tragedy, yada, yada, yada. The matchmaker went on to say, oh, if I had known that she had suffered this terrible injury, I would never have made the match. And this all came out because there's now video all over YouTube showing her knockout in May. And the point being, hey, it's your business to know.
Exactly.
It's your job. That's why you're paid your job.
And
for
don't
what
they
you
post
do.
that on BoxRec when somebody gets knocked down like that in
Yes.
a round?
Yes, it says it on her box rec. So that's really clear that it says that she was knocked out. And, again, it's 3 months. She's 18, to your point, which is, what does she have had 6 fights already at the age
Right.
of 18 is a lot. Okay. But we
Professional
know
fights.
professional fights. And we know that kids fight, there are kids all over the place who fight, turn pro at 16, 17, 18. So that is a governance question. And I will add that since her death, the Quebec coroner's office, because Montreal is part of the sort of the province of Quebec, has come out and said they are going to do a very serious inquest to see exactly what caused her death and what the circumstances were of her death. So this has a lot of eyes on it. I mean, in part, look, any death in the ring is a tragedy. And we all know that. And we all really know that ultimately this is a sport that can kill you.
Absolutely.
So that is the truth of the sport of boxing. And it's for another conversation as to what that really means. But again, to go back into the question of governance, here you had a cross-border fight, no sanctioning body involved because there were no particular belts on the line for this fight. So who were the eyes on the fight? It was the promoter, the boxing commission, and that was it. And the boxing commission never looks, they just rubber stamp whatever you're saying.
Right.
And yes, Yvon Michel signed off on the fight. So is he ultimately responsible? Is it the Mexican handlers that are responsible? Who's responsible for her death? And this is going to be a very interesting conversation to tease out, because there was complicitness on both sides. What was she doing in the ring? Why are her promoters allowing her to fight, having suffered such a serious knockdown? That's number one. Secondly, what has she been doing training for the last 3 months? Has she been getting hit in the head? We had a case of an amateur fighter several years ago. Actually, this was in the run-up 2012 for the first Olympic trials. And this young woman from Florida had suffered a serious injury in the ring in her second fight. And it turned out it was something called second impact, which is basically she had been sustaining small brain hemorrhages during training while she sparred in advance of getting into the ring for competition. I think this was a Ringside magazine, Ringside's amateur championship, which was a route to the Olympic trials. So she was barely touched in her second fight, but she went down. Just one little knock sent her down, and she is still not fully recovered. Now, she lived, but she is not recovered. This is, 9 years later. So head injuries really are no joke. It really is something to consider. And when you add that into things such as abuse of drugs for performance enhancements and everything else, you really do have to go back to this notion of the thing that we've been trying to do in this country for 100 years, which is have a national boxing commission. And then at the greater level, have an international boxing commission that is going to help set what those rules of engagements are. Again, this is a Mexican fighter who came to Canada to fight. Who was watching the store? Apparently no one, and she
No
died.
one.
And
Absolutely.
it's absolute tragedy. And as we go into these discussions of pay equity and all the other things that certainly concern female fighters, and whether or not we go from 2-minute rounds to 3-minute rounds, all these discussions kind of play into that. But the starting premise is you have to be healthy when you come in the ring. And if you're not healthy when you come in the ring, it doesn't matter whether you're fighting 2 minutes or 3 minutes, a 4-round fight, a 12-round fight, you're going to go down and you risk death.
Right. And with that, you figure, when I hear Team Serrano was peddling PEDs, it's like, you are just adding fuel to the fire. What the fuck is wrong with you people? It's like, you don't give fighters PEDs. They can already kill somebody with their bare hands. If you hit somebody hard enough, you could kill them. So adding performance enhancing drugs to the mix is just a prescription for death. Seriously. And you're not respecting the sport or yourself or your opponents at all. So I lost all respect listening to the allegations that the Serrano team was peddling PEDs.
Well, they were Cindy Serrano and her husband, Jordan Maldonado, who is Amanda's trainer and is her corner person in all of her fights. He was actually convicted and went to prison for peddling PED. This was part of a
and he has a boxing license. Why is he even allowed in the corner? He should not even get a license.
I don't know the answer.
That
and again,
is some bullshit.
You coming back to, this is a man who was convicted of a felony, as was Cindy. And Amanda was initially arrested. I mean, she was only around 19 at the time. Charges were dropped against her, but Cindy, her sister, was convicted and fought after. So having that kind of conviction, Maldonado was convicted and has continued to be a force in boxing in her corner. Most recently, in her fight on the Josh Paul card against Mercado, she fought very well. This was supposed to be her moment, and in a lot of ways, from a fighting perspective, it was a terrific outing, except that her trainer, Maldonado, really kind of crossed the line in terms of the abuse that he was hurling at Mercado's corner, really from the middle rounds on, and most particularly caught on camera in the 9th round and at the end of the fight.
Oh yeah, what was he saying?
Well, he was using very, very, very choice curses in Spanish.
I know, but that's the boxing business. I mean, that's what everybody.
It's the boxing business, but it was threatening. He was threatening in the ring.
Oh.
And, kind of coming into the ring, walking into the center of the ring.
Oh, he's being aggressive on top of talking shit.
It's one thing talking shit, it's another thing when you're pushing your chest down in the middle of the ring, and like, as your fighter who's won the fight is being interviewed on air, you're screaming "Bendejo,"
Oh wow. So yeah, he was going there.
And going there and then followed Mercado to the, she was alone getting into the ambulance, and he's still yabbing at the mouth that she wasn't fighting like a Mexican fighter, why was she?
Amanda should have shut that shit down though. I'm not going to let my managers talk to people all crazy and shit. I don't give a fuck what he's doing, what he's saying. No, that shit is not cool.
It seems that he's more than just a trainer or manager in terms of the relationship to the Serrano sisters, according to Diego Murillo's article in the ring, that he has a lot more control than just someone who's a manager or trainer, not allowing her to have a cell phone, things like this. Something else going on there.
Mm-hmm. He's a control freak.
Yeah, and people just so to say shaking their heads, when they're not putting it on record, but anybody who knows him, who's had opponents who've had to deal with him, just kind of go, I mean, even when Cindy Serrano fought Katie Taylor a few years ago, he was mouthing in the ring and being very intimidating and Camp Taylor, Katie Taylor's corner was not digging it and really, really was like, hell no. And in part, it's what informed them to say, hey, you want to have a fight with me? You're going to get VADA test. So that's where sort of we're closing the loop, because Taylor's camp was like, if Serrano's going to fight, we're going for VADA testing. And if you're not going to VADA test, we're not going there. So we'll see how this all plays out.
And as you said before, Maldonado got thrown out of the previous fight with Amanda Serrano for doing the similar thing. Yeah,
the previous fight when she fought Bermudez in Puerto Rico, the refs in Puerto Rico said, out of here. And that's the thing, when on the Jake Paul card was in Cleveland, and it's a very very amateurish group, if you will. I mean, they're not that experienced as refs or anything else. There was stuff they tolerated that if you did it in Las Vegas or New York or California or Puerto Rico, you're out. And he was tossed out of the ring for just that kind of behavior in the last fight. So the refs in Cleveland just kind of let it go. They didn't know how to handle it, I guess. But again, governance, training, all the things that go into management of a ring.
Right.
If you're allowing that kind of behavior, if you're allowing bullying in the ring against the other corner, I mean, again, yeah, you're right. You say, hey, that's boxing. Look at Garcia's father, right? I mean, he's renowned for being a jerk in the ring, in the corner. But there's a line. You're not threatening. You're not in the middle of it. What's he going to do next? Is this going to be a Claressa Shields situation where her brother starts beating up on your opponent's trainer? I mean, that's where it can go. So, and for Serrano, it left a little bit of a bitter taste, because she had a huge audience. She had her largest audience watching her fight. It was her biggest payday by a lot. And, when you have the Ring magazine saying, hey, this was a great moment, but you kind of got a little tainted, that's not a good
No, that's
look.
not a good thing. And you lost a few fans along the way, because she lost a fan in me.
Yeah. And then,
sorry.
when you're negotiating with for your next big fight, which is what's happening right now between Eddie Hearn, who's managing Katie Taylor, and Lou DiBella for Amanda Serrano, and that whole group, to try to put together a mega fight at this point, they're talking about Madison Square Garden in the spring, sometime around between Women's International Day in March, on March 8th, and St. Patty's Day, which in New York, as New York City fans know, is the biggest fight day, when you have a Puerto Rican fighter and an Irish fighter duking it out. We love that. You can fill that Madison Square Garden 10 times over. If I'm Eddie Hearn, I'm making some big demands on that behavior. I'm saying, you're not going to do this. You're going to put a muzzle on your man. So we'll see.
Right.
We'll see.
Right on. Okay. So Eddie, anything else you want to touch on today before
I think that, we go through almost this every week, and then people forget about it the next week when something else comes up, or there's a really good, exciting fight or important fight announcement, and people talk about that. But for boxing, it's sort of like a death by 1,000 cuts. And in our own lifetimes, we've seen such a decline of popularity and prestige of boxing, because this stuff goes on in one form or another all the time. And we haven't even gotten into the judging controversies this week, which outrage people. This boxing can only take so much of it, and that's led to the decline. At the same time, for sports fans, there are so many different alternatives. For combat sports fans, there are so many different alternatives. There are things that I'm not particularly into, might be generational. Esports are really growing, where you could see, play these video games where people can blow each other's heads off or whatever they do. There's the fake wrestling still has a fan base. There was a report, I don't know if it's verified, but it looks like Gable Steveson, the Olympic gold medalist at heavyweight in freestyle wrestling, might have signed with the WWE. There are all these other alternatives that are out there. And the promoters, the networks, the fans, more and more saying, why do we have to put up with this crap?
Right.
This is utterly insane. And you add to it the fact that in the US, you have the PBC, which started off saying, oh, we're going to bring back great boxing to free television, is now putting its lowest level fights on broadcast TV, such as Fox. I don't see how they could last much longer on Fox, and doing all the big fights when they even have them on pay-per-view. And it's sort of like, you know, the walls are closing in. And there's a little tidbit to throw in with this. You might remember about 10 years ago, there was a movie called Real Steel that starred Hugh Jackman, and it was set in the future for then, which is actually our present, when robot boxing had taken over, because boxing and combat sports had just become too brutal. They never fully explained the transition, and also it's a technology that didn't exist then and doesn't exist now in terms of where you could really control these robots to simulate boxing. Right. The movie did okay, kind of, then it went into cable and faded away, but it was recently picked up by Netflix. And it's actually based on a 1950s science fiction story called Steel by the late science fiction writer Richard Matheson, and was also a version of it was in an early Twilight Zone in the 1960s with Lee Marvin, and it was called Steel, which you could probably find online somewhere anyway. And all of a sudden, in 2021, a lot of people on Netflix are watching Real Steel. The movie's having an unheralded sort of grassroots revival. And you got to ask yourself, you know, the clock is ticking for boxing. There isn't a real movement now to abolish it. There might be in the future, but it could marginalize itself right to a point where it's culturally irrelevant. It's getting to that point already anyway. Just go ask people outside of the UK, who are the heavyweight champions today, or who's the heavyweight champion of the world, and you're more likely to get a blank stare than anything else. And that certainly wasn't the case in our lifetimes. So
who is the heavyweight champion of the world?
Well, there's not one. That's where you start to explain WBA and
right.
WBC and all this crap to people, and that Fury and Joshua were supposed to fight, but you know, you start to explain this and people just sort of shake their heads.
Right,
and say,
they tune out.
What the hell? I mean, it's like the baseball season is it's the pennant race is heading to the playoffs. And you're going to get to a situation where the American League champion says, we don't want to play the National League champion. We instead want to play, you know, a last place team. Instead, it's right. Something you can't even, you know, that can't happen. But in boxing, it happens all the time. So I don't know that boxing and the combat sports have much of a future without a complete overhaul of their governance. And I also don't think you can have a major overhaul of the governance without it taking place first in other sports. I mean, you see Olympic boxing, AIBA, the Olympic Boxing Federation, was suspended by the IOC, which is hardly a big opponent of corruption, and it still hasn't been reinstated. We don't know if it will be, despite some but not complete changes in their leadership. And if Olympic boxing goes, what's the effect going to be on professional boxing? So there are a lot of moving parts in this, And I think it's important to really focus on the core issue, the governance issue
Right.
for the sport and for the safety of everyone involved. But I'm not optimistic about it for boxing.
Or for any major sports, because they're all corrupt.
Yeah, but boxing is
Super
know,
corrupt. All right.
yeah, the world champion of corruption in sport.
Right. All right, folks. Well, look, that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you for tuning in. I want to thank my girl Malissa from Girl Boxing Now. You guys follow her on Twitter. She's an author and blogger, author of a women's history of women's boxing. You guys can pick that up on Amazon. And my boy Eddie at NHB News from No Holds Barred News. Eddie, he's the sage of combat sports. I want to thank you guys for being here today. You guys want to give a shout out to anybody tell people where they can find you other than what I've already mentioned?
Girlboxing.org and then on Twitter and Instagram, Girlboxing Now.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you.
And I got patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. And I got a red bubble page if you want to buy a little bit of merchandise with my.
Oh, Eddie got merch.
Yes, with my Punim on it.
Cool.
And you will look fabulous with it. I have everything on there from t-shirts to mini skirts. So.
Oh my Lord. Well, I don't know about, I'm not doing
I don't know about
mini
a skirt,
Right.
but
We're not doing no skirts over here. But yeah, right on. You guys go and check Eddie out on his Patreon page and pick up some of that Eddie No Holds Barred merch. And you guys can follow me on Instagram at LA Fight Goddess. On Twitter, I'm at Angry Afro Radio. We'll see you guys next time. Hit that like button. Follow us. Subscribe. We'll be out. Peace. Right on.
Yes.
All right.